Hey, welcome back to the stash. When people talk about Silver Age Marvel, certain books always dominate the conversation. Whether it's a title like The Amazing Spider-Man or The Fantastic Four, those are the comics that usually get remembered as the defining titles of the era. One of the things I love about going back through Marvel's history is getting into this phase of the more underrated comics that don't get nearly as much attention as they deserve. And for me, one of the best examples of that from my reading journey is the Human Torch's run in Strange Tales. Beginning with Strange Tales issue 101 in 1962 and ending with Strange Tales issue 134 in 1965, these stories followed Johnny Storm both as a solo hero and later alongside Ben Grimm, the Thing. And across these 30 or so issues, Marvel used this feature to expand the Fantastic Four's world, develop Johnny as a character outside of the team flagship title, and eventually create a series built around one of the best friendships in comics. Now, before I go any further, I will say that even if I really like the comic for what it is, I still find it to be more on the weaker side for Silver Age Marvel comics. A lot of the villains are fairly forgettable, some stories feel incredibly average, and there are moments where the comic feels like Marvel was still trying to figure out exactly what they wanted the title to be. During the solo Human Torch era, I found it to be a pretty, decent experience that still allowed me to get heavily invested with the character, but once Ben Grimm joins the feature, I felt that it luckily got even better. So while we're not necessarily talking about greatness here, we are still talking about a run that played an important role in Marvel's growth during the 1960s, as well as a comic that I still managed to gain a lot of enjoyment from. It's a run that helped establish Johnny Storm as more than just the youngest member of the Fantastic Four, as well as one that just proved just how entertaining the relationship between Johnny Storm and Ben Grimm could be when given the spotlight. But hey, real quick, here at the Stash, we're swinging for 30,000 subscribers. And you know what they say, with great power comes great responsibility. So if you're into the Human Torch and comic book deep dives, feel free to hit subscribe. Seriously, any support means the world to me. And be sure to stick around to the very end for a very special episode of Comics from the Stash, because today, we're going over all my Human Torch issues from Strange Tales. With that all said, let's get right back into the video. One of the most impressive things about this entire run is simply the fact that it exists. It's easy to forget now because Marvel characters are everywhere, but in 1962, Marvel was still building its universe, with the Fantastic Four only debuting the previous year. Yet somehow, Johnny Storm had already become popular enough to headline his very own title. That alone says a lot about how appealing the character was during Marvel's early years. Johnny represented something unique. Reed Richards was the genius, Sue Storm was the heart of the team, Ben Grimm was the gruff powerhouse, whereas Johnny was the young, impulsive, and energetic one. Here's the character younger readers could immediately connect with. And Strange Tales gave Marvel the opportunity to explore that side of Johnny in a way Fantastic Four often couldn't. For the first time, Johnny was carrying stories himself. That meant Marvel had to flesh him out and give him his own little world filled with a supporting cast and problems that belong specifically to Johnny Storm. And I think that's one of the feature's biggest accomplishments. Whether the individual stories are great or not, the run succeeds in making Johnny feel like a genuine standalone character. His life outside the Fantastic Four, as well as him simply as a person, becomes far more defined. You get a better understanding of who Johnny Storm actually is when he's not standing next to Reed Richards, Sue Storm, and Ben Grimm. And for a character who could have easily remained the kid on the Fantastic Four, I feel that's a significant achievement. Another thing I really appreciate is how this feature expanded the Fantastic Four mythos. Like Marvel could have, made these stories completely disconnected from the Fantastic Four, but instead, they often feel like an extension of that world. They do it in a way that it's so good. It's its own thing, while at the same time being like a companion book. It's really done well. Plus, you can even see Marvel building those connections between the titles. It's something Silver Age Marvel excelled at. Even when stories were relatively simple, there was always a sense that every book existed within the same growing universe. And I find that these Human Torch stories contribute to that feeling big time. You never forget that Johnny belongs to a bigger world, and because of that, the comic feels important even when the stories themselves aren't always groundbreaking. Of course though, one of the biggest talking points for me surrounding this run is its villains, and if I'm being honest, this is probably where most of my criticisms come from. Now, don't get me wrong, I love my low tier villains. I have a huge soft spot for obscure Silver Age bad guys. If you give me a ridiculous costume and a bizarre gimmick, I'm probably going to enjoy the comic. But even with that in mind, the Human Torch feature has a pretty uneven villain roster. Like, the run gave us characters like the Wizard, Pastepot Pete, Plantman, and Asbestos Man. Now, while some are actually pretty iconic within the world of Marvel, an example being the Wizard, who became one of the Fantastic Four's most recognizable enemies, the others are pretty much completely forgotten, maybe save Pastepot Pete. The problem is that many of these antagonists simply aren't strong enough to consistently carry stories. It left me to often remember the concept more than the execution itself, leaving some of the actual stories to blend together. I think that's a big reason why this run doesn't reach the same heights as something like Amazing Spider-Man or Fantastic Four during the same period. Those comics had villains who could immediately command attention, be it Doctor Doom, the Green Goblin, Dr. Octopus, but sadly for me, the Human Torch feature rarely had that level of threat. Still, I don't think the villains completely undermine the series, because the real appeal often comes from Johnny himself. Whether it's watching Marvel continue to shape his identity, or even to see how he handles things on his own. Plus, another major strength has gotta be the artwork. Whether it's Steve Ditko, Dick Ayers, but especially Jack Kirby, the art side of things was always a positive for me. But Jack Kirby's influence in particular can easily be felt throughout this entire comic, and to be honest, I think Kirby's work elevates material that could have otherwise been, pretty forgettable. I mean, few artists in comic history could make simple stories feel larger than life the way Kirby could, but that's why we love him. I also feel like the Human Torch is a character built for Kirby's art, if that makes sense. Like, he suits Kirby's strength to a T, and the result is some really great artwork. Dick Ayers also deserves a tremendous amount of credit as well. His contributions to the series went on to help define the visual identity of these stories. Even when I'm not especially invested in what's happening, I'm almost always enjoying how the comic looks, and that matters, especially during an era where visual storytelling was such a major selling point. And of course, Stan Lee and Larry Lieber also deserve recognition for helping establish the comic's personality. Again, I don't think this run contains Marvel's strongest writing, but I do think it successfully understands what makes Johnny appealing. There's an enthusiasm to these stories, a sense of fun, and a youthful energy. That's something the creative team constantly captures, and honestly, that's probably why I enjoy the run more than its overall quality would suggest. It's hard to dislike a comic that clearly enjoys spending time with its main character. But by the time the solo era concludes with Strange Tales issue 123, I think above all else, Marvel successfully proves something important, that Johnny Storm could work outside the Fantastic Four. He could support his own title and carry stories as a leading character. Now, for me, the moment Ben Grimm joins the series, everything immediately becomes just that bit more enjoyable. Not dramatically better, but definitely more fun, and the reason is simple. Johnny and Ben are one of Marvel's best pairings, with a friendship that's always been built on conflict. They're generally like brothers, always going back and forth, but with real affection underneath it all. It's a dynamic that works almost anywhere. You can put Johnny and Ben into pretty much any situation and they'll make it more entertaining, and the team-up era of Strange Tales understands this. Rather than relying entirely on villains, the stories often derive their appeal from the relationship between the protagonists. The interactions become more enjoyable and the feature gains a stronger personality. For me, that's the biggest improvement. The Human Torch solo stories sometimes struggle to find a consistent hook beyond Johnny himself, but once Ben arrives, the hook becomes obvious. People enjoy watching these two characters interact, and honestly, who can blame them? Few Marvel friendships have endured as long as theirs. Few relationships feel as natural. Few characters bounce off one another as effectively. Plus, the period also feels more closely connected to the Fantastic Four's world. It's fitting though, because Ben Grimm is such a central part of that world. The stories increasingly feel like companion pieces of the Fantastic Four rather than separate adventures. For some readers, that might be a negative, but for me, it's actually one of the era's strengths. The Fantastic Four has always been built around family, and while Johnny and Ben spend most of the time pretending to drive each other crazy, they're still family. Giving them a shared feature only went on to allow Marvel to explore that relationship in way greater detail. Still though, the villains aren't particularly strong. That's probably the biggest limitation preventing this era from becoming something truly special. And while the addition of Ben Grimm improves the feature, the artwork remains strong, the character dynamics improve substantially, the opposition rarely reaches the level needed to elevate the material further. As a result, I found Strange Tales to be more so enjoyable as opposed to a title that's essential. And if I'm being honest, I find myself remembering this era far much more than the solo run if we go beyond the original's novelty. Sure, the stories aren't dramatically better, but the characters are. Johnny and Ben simply make each other far more entertaining. It's that simple. And And of course, once again, the artwork deserves praise. Kirby and Ayers continue to hand in some really great work for the Silver Age. Even the stories themselves are relatively straightforward, I more often than not find the visual presentation keeping things engaging. And that's important because this period arrives during such a critical moment in Marvel's history. But eventually, of course, the feature comes to an end. Strange Tales issue 134 marks the final Human Torch and Thing story before the title shifts direction and Nick Fury takes over the feature. It's a major change for the book, but it also feels symbolic of Marvel's evolution. The company was moving into new territory. Spy fiction was becoming increasingly popular, and Marvel was constantly looking for opportunities to expand. All that meant for the Human Torch era of Strange Tales, though, was that its time was officially up. At the end of the day, I don't think the Human Torch's run in Strange Tales belongs next to the greats of Marvel's Silver Age comics. If someone asked me where to start reading Marvel from the 1960s, there are plenty of books I'd recommend first. The Fantastic Four, Amazing Spider-Man, The Avengers, Tales to Astonish, even Doctor Strange's Strange Tales stories easily rank higher for me. But that doesn't mean this run lacks value, far from it. Because what makes these comics worth talking about is everything they contributed to Marvel's growing universe, as well as how much fun they still managed to be. They helped establish Johnny Storm as a character capable of standing on his own. They also expanded the Fantastic Four's lore. They showcased the friendship between Johnny Storm and Ben Grimm, and they gave creators like Stan Lee and Larry Lieber, Jack Kirby and Dick Ayers another opportunity to help shape the Marvel universe during one of its most important periods in history. And while I think the overall quality is decent to sometimes good at a push, I never regretted spending time with these comics. They're fun, they're historically important, and if you're already a fan of the Fantastic Four, there's a lot to appreciate here. The Human Torch may have eventually lost his place in Strange Tales, but for over 30 issues, he helped prove that Marvel's world was becoming much bigger than any single title. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Comics from the Stash. Today we're going to go over all my Human Torch Strange Tales comics from my very own collection. So without wasting any more time, let's get right into the showcase. We start off with Strange Tales issue 134. It is the first mention of Eternity, as well as the final issue featuring Human Torch and the Thing as the headliners. After that one, we have Strange Tales issue 133, before jumping down to Strange Tales issue 130, which is actually the first appearance of Caecilius, a disciple of Baron Mordo. It's also the third appearance of Dormammu, and a parody of the Beatles by the Human Torch and the Thing. After that one, we move to Strange Tales issue 129, which is the first appearance of Tiboro, the Spirit of Decay. Then we have another Strange Tales Doctor Strange key issue with issue 128 featuring the first appearance of Demonicus, a disciple of Baron Mordo. The next one is a huge issue, especially for Doctor Strange again. It is Strange Tales issue 126. It is the first appearance of Clea and the first appearance of Dormammu. Next up is a great cover by Jack Kirby. It's Strange Tales issue 125. This one also features a classic battle of the Human Torch and the Thing versus the Submariner. Then we have Strange Tales issue 124. This issue actually marks the beginning of the Thing and Human Torch stories. Then we have another key issue. Strange Tales issue 123 is the first appearance of the Beetle. We then go back to Doctor Strange key issue, the Strange Tales issue 118. It is the first partial appearance of Doctor Strange, as well as the first appearance of the Orb of Agamotto. Then we have this really cool The Thing versus Human Torch cover. It is also the second appearance of Wong. It is Strange Tales issue 116. After that one though, we have to jump all the way down to Strange Tales issue 106, which is the first appearance of Acrobat. Then for the penultimate issue, we actually have one of my favorite covers out of the list. It is Strange Tales issue 103. It is the first appearance of Zemu. Then to end off this showcase, we do have a pretty important one for Strange Tales. It's Strange Tales issue 101. The origin of the Fantastic Four is retold here, but this is where the Human Torch solo stories actually begin. That, though, is it for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you have enjoyed, please like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already, because here, any support means so much. And, yeah, thank you guys again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.